Darwin, when he returned to England, started a phase that he refers to in his own autobiography as mental rioting. What was the meaning of all these things he had seen? He had seen many more things than any naturalist before him. He had studied these things very carefully. He had 5 years to think about them, all that time on the ship, for example. But he knew that this idea about species changing was dangerous. It was heresy. It was absolutely contrary to the doctrine of the Anglican Church at the time. So Darwin knew he theorized at great risk. So he kept his thoughts private, and he started writing in secret notebooks. He lettered these notebooks. As he finished one, he went on to the next. So these are actual specimens of Darwin's original notebooks, some of his writing shown below. And in these secret notebooks, he was developing a theory of species formation. It would be a long time before anyone read these theories. Why? Why secret notebooks? Why was he suppressing this? Well, as I told you, that the immutability of species was the doctrine of the time. Darwin at that time was getting tremendous praise and attention from the scientific community in England. He had been shipping these specimens back, and the paleontologists were studying the fossils, and the ornithologists were studying the birds, and the mammalogists were studying the mammals. They were having a fantastic time, and Darwin was a hero, and he was getting all sorts of honors, all sorts of invitations. And he knew that if he set forth his ideas, he'd lose all these privileges that he was enjoying. He worried about dishonor to his family, the good Darwin name, if he spoke this heresy. And eventually he also had another reason, which was he married Emma, his first cousin, and he was very sensitive to her religious devotion. So he knew he would need more evidence. And then a few years later, again, as he kept working on this massive development of this species theory, a package arrived in the mail. And it was from a naturalist working in the Malay Archipelago, Alfred Russel Wallace. Wallace had gone in to the tropics almost a dozen years earlier. He had developed a theory of species formation, and knowing Darwin's eminence as a naturalist, had sent it to Darwin to see for Darwin's approval and for Darwin's recommendation of how to publish it. Oh goodness, there's Darwin looking at, in short form, his life's work, penned by another scientist. So he was afraid he was going to be scooped. It was terrible timing. He had a 2-year-old son, Charles Jr., who was dying of scarlet fever at the time. But Darwin's friends, his allies, which included the great geologist Charles Lyell and many others, made sure that both Wallace's theory and Darwin's theory were presented together to the Linnaean Society in 1858. And this was the first public airing of this idea that species change and that natural selection is a force. So that's why we talk about Darwin and Wallace. But Wallace always deferred to Darwin as having done the greater, larger, and more original earlier work on species formation. Wallace was always humble about that. So after the appearance of these papers, Darwin pushed on. And in the next year, working at a feverish pitch, he finally completed his work that everyone is most familiar with, The Origin of Species. It is an amazing book, still very readable today. It's a masterpiece of evidence and argument. He not only puts forth all of the evidence he sees from natural history for evolution and for its mechanisms, but he puts forth all the arguments against and dissects that. It's that old thinking from arguing with his father at work. Evidence and argument. These lectures are largely going to focus on two main ideas in The Origin of Species and our understanding today of how evolution works. But Darwin understood that to make these new ideas attractive and inspiring to a new generation, he had to do more than just put forth the raw facts. The Origin of Species contains all sorts of poetic passages, and he closes with these words: "From so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved."